Hi everyone, John Davenport here from Fotomatix.com with another community edit for you. This week's photo was submitted by Steve from the forum, and it was actually a set of 3 photos. We have our bracketed set here, the overexposed, the middle bracket, and our underexposed shot. There probably is enough data here that you could get a decent photograph out of this middle exposure, and depending on how long this video goes, I may try and do a very quick edit of just this middle exposure at the end. But we will start with an HDR composite here. So I'm going to go to export, and I can do the cheap route or the more expensive route, and I think I'm going to go with Photomatix Pro on this one. I've done a few videos using the merge to 32-bit HDR, and it does a pretty good job, but for the sake of this community edit, I'm going to go with the full Pro version, seeing as I have it available here. Now, I'm going to keep all of these settings pretty much the same. These are just what I kind of use for all the photos that I do HDR here. I'm assuming this was taken on a tripod, so we'll just leave that set up there. And then I'm going to output it back as a TIFF 16-bit file back into Lightroom, and that way we will have something to work on there. So I'm going to cut the video here. Once Photomatix loads the image, I'll be back, and that way we'll save a little bit of time there. Okay, so here we are back. We have our tone mapped image, or at least the beginnings of a tone mapped image, and this is pretty much probably where I'm gonna leave it. It kind of saves your previous settings, and I'm usually pretty consistent with where I like my photos, especially since a lot of the HDRs that I do are of the sunset or sunrise variety. So typically what I end up doing is having my strength somewhere in the middle here. I don't like going, a lot of people say that, HDR, you should go all the way to 100. I don't like doing that. I like more even distribution here. And then for saturation, again, I don't like to go all the way to 100. There are a lot of people that do like the very saturated looks to HDR. But I'm going to pull this back probably in the mid 60s, low 70s, somewhere around there. And then tone compression, again, a lot of times people in HDR tone mapping, I think one of the reasons that it gets such a bad name is because there's a lot of people that like to go to the extremes. But I tend to find that when I do HDR, most of my photos end up being in the middle ranges of the sliders here. For the detail contrast, I'm just going to bump it up just a little bit. And for the lighting adjustments, again, somewhere in the middle is probably going to be about where I find a happy medium here. When you start going one way or the other way too far, you end up getting things that don't look right. So I'm going to go with just a -2.2 here. I don't really play around too much with these other adjustments. When I want a little more detail out of the highlights, I'll play around with the smooth highlights or different settings here. But for the sake of this video, I think I'm just going to keep everything the way it is. And I will export this photo, and we'll be back in Lightroom in a second. Okay, so here we are back in Lightroom with our TIFF file that has been imported from Photomatix, and now we just have a few other cleanup things to do and maybe a little bit of sharpening. There's a couple tints here that I'm actually going to clone out. A lot of people might want to keep them because of what they are, but for me, I find them a little distracting, so I'm just going to quickly clone them out, and then I'm going to do just some minor basic adjustments here. I'm going to bring the exposure down just slightly, maybe add a little bit of contrast. I'm going to bring the highlights down to help emphasize the colors in the sky here. And I'm going to increase my shadows, which will put a little bit more light on the mountain range and the foreground rocks here. I'm also going to add just a little bit of vibrance and a little bit of clarity. I'm going to bring the saturation down just a little bit, which will help keep the grass under control and a little more subdued. So I'm kind of looking to get a lot of color out of the sky here, but I don't want the greens to become that toxic green that you often see with oversaturated grass. Finally, I'm going to come down to my detail tab and add a little bit of sharpness to the photo. One of the big things that I want to do is try and separate the foreground from the sky here. So I'm going to actually use my masking tool, and I'm going to really sharpen basically all the hard lines, which is going to be this mountain range here, but not the sky and not too much of the water or the foreground, which I think helps separate things quite nicely. So as you can see, we've come pretty far from our 3 brackets, and I think this is, at least for me, a pretty good representation of an HDR composite. But like I said in the beginning of the video, I wanted to take a stab at just using Lightroom to edit the middle bracket, so that's what I'm going to do really quickly here. We're going to go back up to our basic tab and just take a look and see what we can get out of just this middle bracket here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is bring up my shadows, and that will allow me to see into this foreground. I'm again going to clone out the tints here. As I said before, I do just find them a little bit distracting. If they were more prominent in the frame, I think they'd actually be a very cool compositional element. But being just little tiny pieces here, they almost look like litter or bags or something. So I feel like they're probably best to be removed. That's my own take on it. Now I'm going to come here, maybe raise the exposure a little bit, add a little bit of contrast. I'm going to bring the highlights down, which will help bring the sky back in. And I'm going to also reduce some of the whites here to help bring the sky back down a little bit. Playing around with the white balance, I kind of liked it where it was actually, so I'm just going to go with as shot. I'm going to again raise the vibrance and drop the saturation a little bit and raise the clarity. And I'm going to do the same thing here with my sharpness. I'm going to come in here and really try and sharpen things up. Now, I'm kind of happy with this. I do kind of wish there was a little more detail in the sky. So I think I'm going to try and drop in a graduated filter here and bring down the highlights a little more, maybe bring down the exposure a little bit. Increase the shadows to kind of offset that darkness there. So maybe something like this. But now we have a little bit too much on the mountains here, so I'm going to have to come in with an adjustment brush here and probably just raise the exposure a little bit and carefully come along the mountain range here with my adjustment brush to kind of bring in a little bit more light to the foreground. And I'm going to do the whole foreground with this to kind of separate things. You could do it the other way where you bring your graduated filter in from the sky, from the foreground, and you lighten that up, and then you effectively go through with your adjustment brush here. Or you could do an adjustment brush all over and you separate each one. It's really up to you how you want to go about doing that type of thing. I am going to raise the exposure just a little bit here and maybe add a little bit of contrast. You know what, I might even go and see. That might get a little too much there. So I think this is looking pretty good compared to where we started anyway. And then here's the final one frame edit just in Lightroom, and here's my final HDR edit. You can see that the HDR does have a little bit more punch to it, but in general I think the one frame edit does probably look a little more natural. So it's really kind of one of those which which kinds of photos are you looking for when you edit your photo. So I hope you learned a little something from this community edit, and I hope to see you taking part in future ones. If you would like to submit your own photo for a future community edit, you can follow the link in the description below, and I will be happy to have a photo or two from you, because as of right now I am in desperate need of more submissions. So again, thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.